Georgia, USA. October. The courtroom smelled like old wood, stale coffee, and cynicism. The gavel had barely dropped, and already the room was humming with the quiet static of judgment. Suits shuffled. Stenographers adjusted keyboards. Lawyers rehearsed glances. In the very last row, near the exit, sat a boy who didn't belong. No one noticed him at first. He looked 16, maybe 17, definitely not 18, though his driver's license would have argued otherwise. He wore a second-hand blazer too big for his frame, sleeves brushing knuckles. His hair was neat but uninspired, brown eyes too serious for someone that young. He clutched a briefcase, though not with the casual ease of a professional, but the reverence of a student who knew he wasn't supposed to have it. His name was Caleb Miles, and in 48 hours, he would become the most talked-about name in American legal history. But today, he was invisible. At the front of the courtroom sat Judge Raymond Harlan, silver-haired, bloated with reputation, and allergic to disrespect. Harlan had served on the bench for 27 years and carried the kind of arrogance that comes with being unchallenged for too long. He'd sent away gang members, doctors, even a senator's son once. But what he loved most was winning the room. And today's hearing promised just enough tension for a good performance. The case? A single mother, Angela Torres, was being sued by a real estate developer for trespassing and property damage. The damage in question was a makeshift fence she'd erected to keep her daughter from wandering into the construction site next door, a site that had nearly swallowed the family's backyard due to faulty excavation. Angela had no lawyer. She tried to get one, but couldn't afford the fees. Legal aid had a wait list. Her hearing was expedited. She was alone, except she wasn't, because Caleb was there, sitting quietly, heart pounding like a war drum in his chest, fingertips trembling inside his sleeves. He had no license to practice law, no legal degree, not even a GED, but he had something rarer: truth, tenacity, and the kind of mind that made grown men sweat. "Ms. Torres," Judge Harlan said, adjusting his glasses, "you are being given the opportunity to speak for yourself. Do you understand that by refusing counsel, you are waiving representation?" Angela opened her mouth, but Caleb was already standing. "She's not waiving anything, Your Honor. She has representation." The courtroom stiffened. Harlan blinked. "Who are you?" "Caleb Miles, representing Ms. Torres." Laughter broke out. Someone near the jury box coughed into their fist to hide a chuckle. Even the opposing attorney, Martin Sloan, known for crushing pro bono cases, allowed himself a smirk. "Mr. Miles," Harlan said, "this isn't a high school debate. Sit down before you embarrass yourself." But Caleb didn't sit. Instead, he reached into his briefcase, pulled out a stack of documents, and walked to the front. There was something in his walk. It wasn't confidence exactly. It was deeper, more tragic. It was conviction shaped by pain. "Your Honor, under Rule 5.5b of the Georgia Rules of Professional Conduct, a non-lawyer may not practice law unless representing themselves. That's why Ms. Torres has filed a motion to appoint next friend." Harlan's eyes narrowed. "A next friend?" "Yes, sir. A non-attorney may serve as a legal advocate for a minor or mentally incapacitated person. Ms. Torres has been diagnosed with PTSD and chronic anxiety, both documented and supported by her physician." Caleb placed a file on the bench. "In such cases, the court may allow a next friend to speak on their behalf." Silence. Harlan flipped through the file. "Real. Authentic. Court stamped." He looked up, annoyed. "This is clever, but your lack of credentials does not override procedural rights," Caleb finished. "I'm not practicing law. I'm advocating." And just like that, the court leaned forward. What unfolded over the next 2 hours was not just a hearing. It was an unraveling of assumptions, of pride, of the very structure that held up Harlan's career. Caleb tore into Sloan's evidence like a wolf through wet paper. He cited obscure municipal codes, exposed corruption in the building permits, and referenced OSHA violations buried so deep in the site's history even the developers hadn't noticed. He did it calmly, methodically, but with a fire in his voice that made even seasoned attorneys sweat. Every objection Sloan raised, Caleb dismantled. Every eye in the room widened. Even the judge stopped interrupting. But here's the thing. Caleb wasn't performing. He wasn't grandstanding. He was bleeding. Because this wasn't just about Angela Torres. It was about his mother, dead from an eviction notice turned violent. It was about a boy who once called 911 and was told to grow up. About a system that chewed through the powerless like bones in a grinder. He'd studied law for 3 years. Secretly. Alone. At night. In libraries. Through textbooks pulled from dumpsters and donated by old professors who saw something in his eyes. He'd watch trials on YouTube until 3 a.m. Memorized case law like scripture. Argued with himself in the mirror for hours, pretending the reflection was a bench. He didn't want to be a lawyer. He wanted to be heard. By the end of the hearing, the courtroom was silent. Even Sloan had stopped objecting. Judge Harlan leaned forward, elbows on the bench. He looked at the boy. This teenager. This nobody. And for the first time in a decade, the judge's voice cracked. Where did you learn to speak like that? Caleb didn't smile. He just said quietly, from people like you, Your Honor. The ones who never listened until it was too late. Angela Torres won her case. The company was fined. The fence was ruled legal. A news crew waiting for another viral courtroom meltdown, left instead with the story of a lifetime. But that was only the beginning, because someone else had been watching. A woman in a Navy suit, in the back row, with a card that read, Dean, Harvard Law, Atlanta, Georgia, 4 days after the hearing. The video hit 1 million views in less than 24 hours. A shaky courtroom live stream posted by a local journalist had captured every second of Caleb's firestorm performance. His arguments, his rebuttals, the moment Judge Harlan's mask cracked. The comments section exploded with reactions. Who I asked this kid? That judge got owned. Better than any episode of Suits. But Caleb Miles didn't have Wi-Fi at home. He found out he went viral from a whisper in the hallway of the community shelter where he slept 3 nights a week. That's where Diana Everett found him. She was tall, elegant, the kind of woman who never apologized for her presence in a room. Dean of admissions at Harvard Law, and daughter of the first black female judge in Georgia's Southern Circuit. She had flown in without a security escort, her heels clicking down the shelter corridor like a gavel on marble. She found him sitting on a bench in the back garden, hunched over a battered paperback of constitutional law for non-lawyers. Caleb Miles? He looked up slowly. Her tone was precise, clean, measured like a verdict. I've been looking for you. They sat across from each other in the library next door. It was too quiet, the kind of silence that made every breath feel suspicious. Caleb stared at the envelope she slid toward him. A full scholarship, she said. Harvard Law. Room, board, stipend. Conditional on completing your GED first. But given your courtroom performance, I assume that's trivial. He didn't touch the envelope. He barely blinked. Then why? She tilted her head, watching him like an equation she wanted to solve. Because we don't build brilliance. We find it. And when we do, we make sure the system doesn't smother it. That should have been the end of it. He should have leapt, grinned, called someone. But Caleb's silence grew heavier. His fingers traced the edge of the table instead of the paper. There's something else you should know, he murmured. That hearing wasn't legal. Not entirely. Everett narrowed her eyes. I bent the rules. I wasn't supposed to speak on her behalf. If Harlan had pushed harder, if Sloan had caught the detail, Angela would have lost. But you won. Doesn't matter. The law has memory. The system doesn't forget. He finally met her eyes. There is no hunger in them. Only bruised calculation. I don't want to be a trophy for Harvard. I want to matter. If this is just a PR stunt. She held up a hand. Let me be very clear, Mr. Miles. You don't impress me because of what you did in a courtroom. You impress me because of why you did it. She leaned forward. Your mother died in eviction court, didn't she? The air seemed to collapse. I read the record, she continued gently. Your mother, Amy Miles, was evicted with 48 hours' notice. She collapsed during a seizure while officers were removing furniture. You were 14. You tried to represent her. They laughed you out of the building. Caleb said nothing, but his throat flexed. Once. You didn't get here because you're gifted. You got here because you refused to disappear. She slid the envelope closer. This isn't a reward. It's a weapon. Use it wisely, That night, Caleb didn't sleep. He walked the entire stretch of Howell Mill Road twice, past the construction sites, past the courthouse that looked like a mausoleum in the moonlight, past the shelter where someone else had taken his bed. He didn't even realize his shoes were bleeding at the heel until he sat down at a bus stop at 4:43 a.m. He hadn't cried in 4 years. But tonight, he let one tear fall. Just one. For his mother. For the years of being nobody. For the terrifying possibility that his life was changing and that he'd have to become someone else to survive it. 2 months later, Cambridge, Massachusetts. He arrived with a single suitcase and a mind sharper than most professors twice his age. Harvard didn't know what to do with him. He wasn't a prodigy. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't even confident. But in every class, Caleb listened with the intensity of someone burning from the inside out. He didn't socialize, didn't attend mixers, didn't date. But when he spoke in class, everything stopped. Professors like Graham Lutz, a constitutional law legend, called him a contradiction wrapped in fire. His classmates whispered that he argued like someone who didn't care about winning, but couldn't bear losing. And yet, even Harvard had its predators. Ethan Granger, third-year student, law review president, son of a federal judge. He wore ambition like cologne. Thick, suffocating, unavoidable. He'd seen the viral video, called Caleb the TikTok lawyer behind his back, made jokes in class, subtle at first, but cruel. And Caleb? He didn't react. Until Granger crossed the line. One day in moot court, Granger purposefully accidentally rearranged Caleb's notes during a recess, throwing his argument into chaos. The move was childish, but strategic. Caleb lost the round. Granger smirked. But Caleb did what no one expected. He said nothing. Not to the dean. Not to the judge. Instead, he began to study Granger. Not for revenge. For understanding. Because Caleb knew, people like Granger don't disappear. They evolve. They inherit the system. And if you don't know how to dismantle them from the inside out, they'll win forever. By winter, Caleb was already outperforming second years. He was offered a clerkship with a federal judge. Professor Lutz invited him to assist with a civil rights case. And then, out of nowhere, an email arrived. From the Office of Legal Oversight. Subject: unauthorized practice of law in state of Georgia. Attached: a formal complaint. Judge Harlan had filed a grievance. Not because Caleb broke the law, but because he broke the illusion. Harlan couldn't allow the viral moment to define his legacy. And now, he wanted retribution. Caleb had 30 days to respond. Failure to do so would bar him from practicing in the state of Georgia, possibly permanently. The machine was moving. The system was snarling back. Dean Everett called him to her office immediately. "You're being punished," she said coldly, "because you embarrassed them. This isn't about rules. It's about power." Caleb stood stiff, jaw clenched. "I can't go back. I won't beg. You won't have to." She opened a folder and slid it forward. "We're taking this public." "What?" "You're not going to fight this in silence. You're going to fight it the same way you won your first case, in front of the world." She tapped the folder. Mock Trial Nationals. Harvard's never lost. This year, the theme is ethics and the law. You're going to tell your story in open court, and this time, the judges will be real, including one from Georgia's Supreme Court. Caleb stared at her. "You want me to turn my trauma into theater?" "No," she said. "I want you to show them what happens when a boy they ignored becomes the man they can't silence." That night, he returned to his dorm, closed the door, and for the first time in months, he opened the envelope Everett had first given him. Inside wasn't just the scholarship letter. There was a note in his mother's handwriting, a photocopy from a file Everett had found buried in state archives. Just 6 words, written in the margins of a custody request. "Don't let them erase my boy." He read it 5 times. Then he picked up a pen and began to write his closing argument. March, Boston, Massachusetts. The snow hadn't melted yet. Patches of icy grit lined the cobblestones outside Langdell Hall, where students filed in wearing tailored coats and practiced indifference. But inside room C-112, a storm was gathering, one that had nothing to do with weather. The Harvard National Mock Trial team sat in silence, watching a stranger command the center floor. He wasn't tall. He didn't speak loudly. But when Kayla Miles opened his mouth, the air changed. "We are not here to win points," he said quietly. "We are here to expose a truth. And if we're not willing to bleed a little for that truth, then what's the point?" Someone snorted. It was Ethan Granger, of course. "Save it for the opening statement, Miles." Caleb didn't flinch. He turned to the blackboard behind him and began outlining the strategy he'd spent the last 3 weeks constructing, built around precedent, psychology, and a haunting case study, his own. The case theme: when the law betrays justice. A fictionalized trial about an underage legal activist being prosecuted for unauthorized practice, despite saving a woman from wrongful eviction. It was eerie how close the script mirrored his life. It was almost as if someone had written it for him. He would play the accused, Granger, the prosecution, and the judges, real, rotating federal judges, would hear the case like any other. It was theater, but the stakes were deadly real, because Judge Harlan, in an ironic twist of fate, had been invited to guest judge the final round. Harvard had no idea. Only Dean Everett did. She'd made it happen. 2 weeks before the trial, Caleb hadn't spoken to anyone outside of class for nearly 5 days. His nights were endless loops of old court transcripts, Federalist Papers, and audio interviews with whistleblowers who'd fought corruption and lost. He filled notebooks with strategies, dismantled logical fallacies, rehearsed rebuttals in the dark of his dorm with nothing but the sound of his mother's voice echoing from memory. Speak like you're the only person telling the truth in a room full of lies. Some nights, it felt like he was drowning in ghosts. But he welcomed it, because pain meant clarity. Granger, meanwhile, had declared war. He weaponized charisma, schmoozed the judges during breaks, practiced ruthless cross-examinations that twisted every fact into poison. "You're not a hero, Miles," he sneered in one prep round. "You're a child who broke the law. You endangered your client by impersonating counsel. You belong in juvenile detention, not in court." Caleb didn't interrupt. He took it, let the words carve into him. Then when his turn came, he stood and quietly obliterated Granger's entire argument with one devastating sentence. "If doing the right thing makes me a criminal, what does that make you for defending the wrong one?" The room went still. Even Granger blinked. And Everett, watching from the back, smiled. 5 days before the trial, media frenzy begins. The press got wind of the story. Local outlets leaked Caleb's name. Within hours, his story was everywhere. Teen legal prodigy who shocked a Georgia judge to face trial. Again. Caleb Miles, child advocate or courtroom fraud? Mock trial national finals to feature viral TikTok star. The weight of public scrutiny hit like a truck. Trolls appeared. YouTubers debated his ethics. A right-wing legal podcast branded him an entitled woke brat playing lawyer. Caleb shut off notifications, but the damage bled through. One morning, he found a sticky note on his dorm door. "Real lawyers pass the bar. You pass TikTok." He didn't tell anyone, but he didn't throw it away either. He kept it, let it fuel the fire. The night before the final round, Harvard buzzed with anticipation. The trial would be held in Austin Hall, in a historic wood-paneled courtroom. Every seat was reserved. Cameras were set up. Legal scholars, press, even representatives from Georgia's Judicial Ethics Board were in the crowd. But Caleb? He sat alone in the chapel nearby, not praying, just breathing, remembering his mother's face, the eviction notice, her body on the sidewalk, the cold silence afterward, the way no one looked at him, not even the cops. He didn't rehearse. He didn't need to. He was the case. Trial day, national mock trial finals. The lights were hot. The crowd was silent. Granger swaggered up to deliver the prosecution's opening. "Ladies and gentlemen, today's case isn't about heroism. It's about hubris. The defendant broke the law, plain and simple. He impersonated counsel, disrupted a legal process, and set a dangerous precedent. And he did it, not for justice, but for attention. Polished, persuasive, calculated, and false." Then came Caleb. He stood slowly. No papers, no notes, just truth. "I'm not here to convince you that I'm a hero. I'm here to ask, When the law fails to protect the vulnerable, is silence more ethical than action? He paused. I was 15. I wasn't allowed to speak in court, but my mother was dying, and no one, no lawyer, no advocate, no judge was willing to stop it. So I spoke. You could hear breathing, nothing else. If that makes me guilty, then I accept it. But understand this. If obeying the law means abandoning your humanity, maybe the law needs to answer for itself. The courtroom erupted. Even the cameras shook. Judge Harlan sat stone-faced. Cross-examination, the turning point. Granger tried to rattle him. Mr. Miles, isn't it true you violated Georgia's code of legal ethics? I violated silence. You endangered a woman by pretending to be a lawyer. Yes or no? No. I saved her when the lawyers refused to. You exploited a loophole and went viral for it. If saving a life is a loophole, maybe the system needs rewiring. Even the jury smirked. Granger was losing. Final statements. The verdict of fire. Caleb stepped forward one last time. They told me the law is blind, but I think it's deaf too. Deaf to pain. Deaf to cries for help. Deaf to the poor, the voiceless, the forgotten. He pointed to the judges. You want to punish me? Fine. But remember this. If the law cannot make room for justice, then maybe justice belongs in the hands of those it forgot. The room fell into stunned silence. Even Harlan looked shaken, because in that moment, Caleb wasn't a kid anymore. He was the system's reckoning. The verdict, not guilty. By a unanimous decision, Caleb won the round. The team won nationals. But more than that, a new conversation started. Aftermath, the phone call. 2 hours after the trial, Caleb's phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. You think this is over? It was Harlan. You embarrass me. But I don't lose. Not in Georgia. And when the spotlight fades, you'll find out how deep the roots of this system go. Click. Caleb stood in the rain outside Austin Hall, heart pounding. Not with fear. With purpose. Because now he knew the truth. The system was scared of him. And that meant one thing. He was finally dangerous enough to matter. June, Georgia. It had been 2 years since Caleb Miles had last walked the cracked pavement outside the Fulton County Juvenile Courthouse. Now he stood there again. Older. Taller. But the pain? Still sharp. His fingers brushed against the sleeve of his blazer. It wasn't tailored. It didn't need to be. It just needed to carry the weight of what he was about to do. He looked up at the rust-stained emblem above the door. In justice we trust. Caleb muttered under his breath. Let's see if that still means anything. Flashback, 2 years ago. His mother's breath was ragged as she sat in the courthouse hallway, trembling in a coat too thin for February. They said it was final, Caleb. I don't understand. The judge hadn't even looked her in the eye. The bank had won. They always did. And when Caleb stood up, 15, raw, furious, and shouted that the eviction violated the moratorium, he was escorted out by security. 3 weeks later, she died in a shelter. Heart failure, they said, but it was grief. Everyone knew it. Back to present, June. Caleb was back not just to remember, but to fight. And not in mock trials this time. Dean Everett had made a call. A special hearing had been granted by the Georgia Supreme Court Committee on Judicial Accountability. A whistleblower, anonymous for now, had triggered an internal review of multiple cases handled by Judge Harlan. The allegations? Bias, suppression of evidence, disproportionate sentencing against underrepresented youth. And one name came up again and again, Caleb Miles. The boy he humiliated in court. The boy he tried to bury. The hearing, not a courtroom. A trap. Caleb sat at the long oak table across from Judicial Council. 3 members in gray suits, one of whom kept stealing glances at her phone. They'd allowed Caleb to speak as a direct party of interest. Harlan was not present, but his shadow filled the room. Every creak of a chair, every shuffle of paper, felt loaded. Mr. Miles, we understand you're here with testimony relating to Judge Harlan's courtroom conduct in 2023? Caleb nodded. His voice didn't tremble. I'm here to testify to the culture of cruelty that robbed my mother of her life. I'm here to tell you that justice in that courtroom wasn't just blind, it was deaf and dead. He told them everything. The way Harlan refused to acknowledge new documentation. How he mocked Caleb when he tried to speak on his mother's behalf. How cases were funneled into rulings without review. He told me once, Caleb said softly, "You think words can change the law, boy? You don't know how deep this runs." The panel was quiet. Too quiet. 3 hours later, in the parking lot, a black SUV idled beside Caleb's rental car. The window rolled down. Judge Harlan, alive, arrogant, and unshaken. "You think you can bring me down with sentiment?" he scoffed. "Son, you're trying to tear down an empire with a matchstick." Caleb didn't blink. "No, I'm lighting the fire so others can see it's burning." Harlan leaned closer. "You don't know what you've done." Then he drove off. That night, motel room 3A. Caleb couldn't sleep. The room smelled of mildew and lemon-scented cleaner. His briefcase sat beside the bed, filled with transcripts, photos, audio clips. Everything he'd gathered. Everything Everett helped him find. But it still felt like David versus Goliath. He looked at the folder labeled, Evidence, Miles versus State of Georgia, 2023. It was thin. Not enough. Then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Check your inbox. They're hiding more than you know." Attached was a PDF of sealed documents. Case 48B, Amelia Torres. Case 52F, Malcolm C. Case 56A, Miles Ruth. His mother's name. Her original complaint had never been logged into the court system. Her appeal buried. The eviction, based on a clerical error Harlan's assistant never corrected. It wasn't just neglect. It was sabotage. Next morning, confrontation at the law building. Caleb stormed into the county records office. "Where are the sealed files for Miles Ruth, 2023, he demanded. The clerk stuttered. I'm not authorized." "Then get someone who is." The documents were printed an hour later. Signed by Harlan. Time-stamped. Suppressed. Caleb took them. It was proof. It was war. And now he had ammunition. 2 days later, public hearing begins. Caleb filed an official petition with the Georgia Judicial Review Board. He leaked parts of the sealed transcripts to local press, carefully, methodically. The headline the next day, "Judge who mocked viral teen attorney hid evidence in mother's eviction case." That night, a vigil appeared outside the courthouse. Dozens gathered, holding candles. Not for Caleb, for Ruth Miles, a woman no one remembered, until her son made the system say her name again. Emotional climax, Caleb's speech before the board. "I was 15 when I realized the law doesn't listen to the poor unless it's to punish them. I was 15 when I realized that justice isn't just blind, it's selective. And I was 15 when I realized that if I didn't fight, no one would. My mother died believing she had no voice. I'm standing here to prove she did. I am that voice now." His throat caught. He didn't cry. He couldn't. But his silence hit louder than any word. The board's response. "We will begin an ethics inquiry into Judge Harlan's past rulings, starting with the Miles case." The gallery clapped. Reporters buzzed. Students from Harvard live-tweeted every moment. But Caleb? He just stared ahead. Because this wasn't victory. It was justice delayed. Final scene, Caleb at the cemetery. He knelt beside his mother's grave. There was no fanfare, just wind. They said you were a case number. Now the world knows your name. He placed the sealed court file on the headstone. And, for the first time in years, he let himself cry. Atlanta, Georgia, late July. The candlelight vigil had gone viral. Someone filmed Caleb's final words to the review board and clipped them into a TikTok under the title. He defended his dead mother in court and won. 10 million views in 3 days. A hashtag Justice for Ruth. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt exposed. Morning, Harvard Law dorms. Dean Everett stared at the screen, pale with worry. "You poked the machine, Caleb. You think it's bleeding. But now it's waking up." Across the newsfeed, Judicial Board reviews local judge amid teens allegations. Anonymous source alleges leaked evidence may have been obtained illegally. Minor involved in legal leak raises ethics concerns. They were coming for him. And worse, they were good at it. Harlan's counterstrike. Within 72 hours, Judge Harlan released a statement to the press. "I have spent decades upholding justice. It is shameful to see my reputation undermined by a child who is clearly being manipulated by political actors. The statement was coordinated. Fox, CNN, local news stations all ran it. He painted Caleb as an unstable youth, radicalized by anti-establishment professors and personal grief. And it worked. Threats flooded Caleb's email. A brick shattered his dorm window. Inside the firestorm, Caleb was called to Harvard's Academic Review Board. The leaked files? Someone reported them as illegally obtained. He stood before 5 stern-faced faculty members in wood-paneled rooms lined with dusty legal tomes. You're telling us you had no assistance in procuring these sealed documents? I was sent them anonymously. I verified them. That's not illegal. That's the job of any lawyer, future or not. But you're not licensed, Mr. Miles. A technicality, a trap, and they knew it. Suspension pending review. Caleb had to leave campus. He packed in silence, the same cheap suitcase he arrived with at 16. The irony wasn't lost on him. Harvard gave him a chance to rise. Now I was watching him fall. Back in Atlanta, alone again. He returned to a crumbling apartment downtown. Everett wired some money. A few donors had quietly sent more. The media loved his story. The justice system did not. Caleb paced the floor of his borrowed one-bedroom, heart racing. This wasn't a trial anymore. It was a war, and wars didn't care about truth. Only who had the louder voice. New ally, Maya Ellis. Late one evening, a knock. He opened the door to a woman in her late 20s, black trench coat, eyes sharp. Maya Ellis, investigative journalist. I've been following your case. I believe you, but I need something real. Caleb didn't hesitate. He handed her the sealed files. Print them. Show the world. They'll try to kill it, but maybe this time truth outruns silence. She left with a nod. He prayed it wouldn't be the last time he saw her. 2 days later, the bomb drops. New York Times headline. Judge Harlan suppressed eviction appeal in teen's mother's case. Files reveal pattern of judicial misconduct. Subheadline. Teen legal prodigy forces national reckoning with America's court system. The article hit like a lightning strike. Suddenly, Caleb was not just a voice. He was a symbol. TV appearances, podium speeches, invitations. Everyone wanted a piece of him. The boy who spoke for the voiceless. The child of tragedy who exposed a titan. The genius who'd studied law from library books and courtroom benches. But fame was a storm, and Caleb had never been taught to swim. Maya's warning. Weeks later, over black coffee and red-eye schedules, Maya pulled him aside. They're not done. I've seen sealed subpoenas. They're building a federal obstruction case. They want to end your credibility before this can go further. Caleb's breath caught. Let them try. I'll stand in court again. I was made for this. But Maya didn't smile. You don't get it. This time, it's not just about your mother. They'll use your past, your records, anything. I don't care. You will. The smear begins. An anonymous leak claimed Caleb had altered files and manipulated timelines. Talk show hosts debated his mental stability. A distant cousin gave an interview. He always thought he was better than everyone. A sealed juvenile record surfaced. His first courtroom outburst at 15. Photos of him crying during a trial. Edited, captioned, unstable. It was ugly, brutal, and working. Public opinion began to fracture. Dean Everett's message. Come back. I'll help you fight this. We'll use real channels. But you have to lay low for now. Don't push this alone. Caleb replied with just one line. If I stay silent, they win. The final decision. He stood outside the courthouse again. Not with fire this time, but with clarity. His speech would go live in front of thousands, broadcast to every major news network, translated into 3 languages. No legal jargon. No theatrics, just truth. The speech, broadcast live. I was born in a city where justice is reserved for those who can afford it. I watched my mother die not because she broke the law, but because the law broke her. I studied not to win, but to survive. I may not have a degree. I may not wear a robe, but I know what injustice looks like. I lived with it. I buried it. And now I refuse to let it bury anyone else. The crowd was silent, then erupted. Chapter ends with a shocking turn. A man pushes through the crowd. In his hand, a legal briefcase. He calls out, Kayla Miles, I'm representing the Department of Justice. You've just been summoned to testify in a federal trial against Judge Harlan as a primary witness. Caleb froze. His heart pounded. It was beginning. Washington, D.C., federal courthouse. The hallways echoed with the hollow sound of footsteps, dress, shoes, tapping marble. Reporters lined the stairs like vultures. Inside one of the most powerful courtrooms in the country, cameras were banned, but history was about to be made. At just 18 years old, Kayla Miles was about to testify in a federal trial against one of the most powerful judges in the state of Georgia. And the entire country was watching from the outside. The opening arguments, U.S. v. Harlan. The government's lead prosecutor, Annabeth Cole, began. This is not a case about a bad ruling. It is a case about a man who wore the law like armor while using it as a weapon. The courtroom fell into a stillness rarely felt in federal proceedings. Judge Harlan sat at the defense table, silent but smiling. It was the kind of smile Caleb had seen before, the kind that thought power was permanent. Caleb's turn. When his name was called, he stood with deliberate calm. A fitted navy blue suit. Straight shoulders. No notes. Just memory. He raised his hand, took the oath, and sat. His palms were cold. But his voice? Steel. Tell the court what happened on February 6th, 2023. Caleb closed his eyes. My mother, Ruth Miles, appeared in front of Judge Harlan seeking a temporary delay on our eviction. She presented a medical letter. He ignored it. She brought a legal aid representative. He dismissed them without hearing. I stood to read a federal protection clause. He laughed and said, "Sit down, kid. This isn't a classroom." She died 3 weeks later. Her appeal, I found out, was suppressed. Buried. On his order. Gasped from the gallery. But Caleb didn't waver. I was 15. I didn't know the law. But I knew that justice shouldn't feel like a weapon pointed at your mother's chest. The cross-examination. Harlan's defense team. They tried to unravel him. You're not a licensed attorney, are you? You illegally obtained sealed files, didn't you? You've admitted to emotionally breaking down in court, haven't you? Each time, Caleb met them with calm, clear words. I broke down because my mother was dying. I studied the law so it wouldn't happen again. The turning point. Then Maya Ellis, the investigative journalist, was called to testify. She brought the records, certified now by independent forensic analysts. These files were intentionally marked as resolved without being reviewed. In over a dozen cases, the same judge suppressed appeals within hours of filing. The jury took notes. Their faces had changed. The robe was unraveling. Judge Harlan's testimony, the final stand. When Harlan finally took the stand, he was smug. So what if I dismissed a few cases quickly? The courts are flooded. You want backlog? Or closure? But then came a moment that cracked him. Caleb stood up, not legally required, but morally compelled, and looked Harlan in the eyes. Did you know my mother was dying? Silence. Did you know that she begged for time because she didn't want to die in a shelter? Silence. Did you even remember her name? Harlan blinked. No. That was the answer that echoed louder than any gavel. The verdict, days later. Caleb wasn't in the courtroom when the verdict came. He was at the cemetery, sitting beside his mother's grave. His phone buzzed. Text from Everett. He's guilty. 17 counts. Disbarred. Possible prison time pending sentencing. We did it. Caleb stared at the message. Tears welled up, slow and trembling. We didn't win, Mom, but they finally heard you. That's what matters. He placed a folded copy of the verdict against her stone. You have a voice now. 6 months later, Caleb on Capitol Hill. A special congressional hearing on judicial ethics reform had invited one key speaker. The room was packed. Lawmakers, reporters, students. And at the center of it all, Caleb. He stepped to the microphone. His opening words? My name is Kayla Miles. I'm not a lawyer yet, but I'm the reason you're all here. Final scene. Harvard Law graduation, 3 years later. Rain poured gently on the lawn. Caleb stood in cap and gown. Dean Everett approached him and smiled. You've made history. What do you do now? Caleb looked out over the crowd. Thought of his mother. Thought of every kid still lost in the cracks of the system. I'll make sure it doesn't repeat. He turned to face the stage. The applause rolled like thunder. The boy they tried to silence had become the voice of a generation.